The Manhattan skyline flickered outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing like a crown built on years of patience and sacrifice. Inside my quiet corner office, my phone screen lit up yet again. 102 missed calls, all from the exact same number. Over the past decade, I had blocked and unblocked this number more times than I could count. The caller ID displayed a name I knew all too well: Victoria Sterling, my mother. She was the woman who had stared directly into my eyes on a freezing November night 10 years ago and uttered words I would never forget. "Mark my words, in less than a month you will come crawling back to me, begging." I was 17 years old back then. When she slammed that heavy oak door right in my face, all I had to my name was a single suitcase, $800 in cash, and a sense of dignity I refused to let her crush. I never begged her. I never crawled back. I simply turned around, walked into the biting darkness of Connecticut, and never looked back. Now, 10 years later, the roles had completely flipped. 103 missed calls. 104 missed calls. The phone kept ringing, frantic and relentless. Before I explain why I am letting it ring, let me take you back to the night my mother tossed me out like garbage, and to the massive secret she prayed I would never uncover. When I was 17, the complete breakdown of my life began with a dinner party I was never meant to overhear. The Sterling family estate was situated in an affluent neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut, spanning 3 acres of impeccably manicured lawn. It was the quintessential setup for old money, polite and humble on the surface, while secretly calculating everyone's net worth behind closed doors. I grew up in that mansion, but it never felt like a home. It felt more like a museum, and I was merely an exhibit, expected to be beautiful, silent, and entirely obedient. It was during my Thanksgiving break from boarding school. I had my practiced, standard smile on, enduring another extravagant dinner party hosted by my mother. The VIP guests that evening were the Harrisons, owners of a massive real estate development company. My mother had been circling them for months, referring to their potential partnership as a merger, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. My mother, Victoria, moved through the banquet hall like a queen. She had perfect blonde hair, flawless posture, and a seamless smile that never quite reached her eyes. She married my father when she was 22 and became a widow at 27. My memories of my father were faint and scattered. A deep laugh, strong arms lifting me into the air, and the scent of cedar wood mixed with black coffee. He passed away in a car accident when I was 5. 3 years later, my mother remarried a man named Richard. Richard was a gentle, passive man who obeyed her every instruction and could barely look anyone in the eye. A year after that, my younger sister Meredith was born. She became the family's golden child, the sweet girl who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I remained a living reminder of the late husband my mother could never fully manage. Every time I entered a room, I felt it in her cold glances, constant comparisons, and heavy silences. That night, I excused myself from the dinner table to go to the restroom. On my way back, I heard my name spoken behind the study door. The tone of voice made me freeze right in my tracks. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest, holding my breath to listen. My mother's voice was calm and composed, while old Mr. Harrison sounded rough and impatient. They were negotiating a transaction. It took me a few seconds to process what they were saying, and when the full meaning landed, my blood ran cold. My mother was using my future marriage as a bargaining chip, promising me to Harrison's son. The entire corporate merger hinged on this single condition. Old Mr. Harrison sounded indifferent. "I admit my son has a temper, but your daughter is attractive enough. She will learn how to handle him." My mother's response made my stomach churn. "Elena will do as she is told. She has no other choice. I have made sure of that." No other choice. Those words echoed in my mind. I had met Harrison's son once before at a charity gala the previous spring. He was 24, with a smile as artificial as my mother's. While we were dancing, he squeezed my arm so tightly that I gasped in pain, and he simply smiled at my reaction. The entire evening, he looked at me as if I were a new item for his personal collection. There were persistent rumors among wealthy social circles about his previous girlfriend. People referred to it as an unfortunate incident. Orch. That girl ended up transferring to another school and never spoke publicly again, and now, my mother was handing me over to a person like that, all to secure a corporate deal and preserve her business empire. I stood in the hallway, trembling with anger. I waited until every last guest had departed before going to the living room to confront her. The living room was quiet. Orch. My mother was arranging a vase of roses that did not need trimming. Richard lingered near the fireplace like a shadow, trying not to take up space. 15-year-old Meredith stood at the top of the stairs watching us, having long since learned how to make herself invisible whenever conflict arose. I did not waste time with small talk. "I heard everything," I said. "I will never marry him." Orch. My mother's hand stopped moving among the roses. Her smile remained frozen, but her gaze turned razor-sharp. "What did you say?" "I heard the deal you made with the Harrisons. I know what his son is like, and I know what happened to his former girlfriend. I would rather live on the street than marry someone like him, just for your financial gain." Orch. She turned around slowly, and the mask she had worn for years finally slipped off. She was no longer the elegant hostess. In her eyes was a chilling coldness that I had only caught glimpses of a few times in my life. She let out a faint laugh that sent a shudder down my spine. "Live on the street?" she repeated. "That can easily be arranged." Orch. She gave me a firm ultimatum. "Accept the engagement before morning, or pack up and leave the house." No money, no connections, no family support. Richard stood there without saying a single word. Meredith remained frozen at the top of the stairs, tears streaming down her cheeks, yet staying completely silent. I went back to my room and packed a single suitcase. Orch. A few changes of clothes, my personal identification documents, and my grandmother's necklace, which was the only piece of jewelry I truly cherished. I counted my savings, which consisted of birthday money I had quietly set aside over the years without Victoria's knowledge. $847. It was not much, but it belonged entirely to me. I took one last look around the bedroom where I had grown up. Orch. It struck me that it had never truly been my room. It was just a space filled with expensive items belonging to a woman who viewed people as personal assets. On my vanity sat a photograph of my grandmother, Margaret. She was the original founder of Sterling Properties, the person who had built the company from the ground up. Orch. She was also the only person in the world who had loved me in a way my mother never could. She had passed away 2 years earlier, and ever since, Victoria's authority over the household had become complete and suffocating. I picked up the photograph and whispered softly, "I did not understand what you meant back then, Grandma, but I am not staying here to be controlled." Orch. As I zipped up my suitcase, I noticed something I had never seen before, a small envelope taped securely to the inside lining of the suitcase lid. Written on it was my grandmother's handwriting. "For Elena, when you are ready to leave." My heart raced against my ribs. I wanted to open it right then and there, but I heard my mother's footsteps approaching outside. There was no time. Orch. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, grabbed my suitcase, and walked downstairs to face her one last time. Victoria stood near the front door with her arms crossed, her posture full of distant confidence. Richard stood behind her, silent as ever. Meredith was still on the stairs, crying, still saying nothing. My mother's voice was completely devoid of warmth. "This is your final chance. Orch. Step out that door, and you are no longer part of this family. No phone, no financial support, nothing." I looked at the woman who had raised me, and I felt nothing in return. No affection, no warmth, not even anger, only cold calculation. She had never viewed me as a daughter, only as an instrument to be used. "I was never real to you anyway," I said. Orch. Then I turned around and stepped out into the freezing November night. The front door shut firmly behind me with a loud thud. My mother's voice carried through the heavy wood. In less than a month, you will come crawling back, begging for help. Do you hear me? 1 month. I kept walking forward without turning back. Porch. The cold air burned my chest, and tears chilled on my face before they could fall. But I did not stop, and I had no intention of begging. At the time, I did not realize that the crucial secret my mother tried so hard to keep hidden had already been passed down to me by my grandmother. It was something far more impactful than money. A truth capable of dismantling Victoria's entire enterprise. And right then, it was sitting quietly in my coat pocket, waiting for the day I would be strong enough to use it. The roadside motel had a cheap, flickering sign, and the desk clerk asked no questions, which suited me just fine. I had walked for 2 hours along the dark highway, the wheels of my suitcase scraping against the cold pavement as my breath turned to mist in the icy air. I paid $42 for a small room that smelled of old smoke and age. The heater in the corner made a rattling noise, putting out just enough warm air to keep me from shivering. I sat on the edge of the bed in my coat, finally allowing the weight of everything to settle over me. I was completely on my own. 17 years old, with one suitcase, $800 that would not last very long, and an unopened envelope in my pocket. I pulled my grandmother's necklace from under my sweater and pressed it against my chest. The metal was warm against my skin, and for a fleeting moment, I could almost feel her presence with me. Margaret Eleanor Sterling was the woman who had built a real estate business from scratch, the person who stood by me when no one else did. She had passed away 2 years ago, but the grief of losing her was still fresh, like an ache that refused to go away. That was when her words came back to me, words she had whispered to me the night before she passed. I had not understood them at the time, but now they felt like a serious warning. 2 years prior, I had sat beside her bed in a quiet hospital room filled with flowers and the steady beep of monitors. She was 78, weakened significantly by her illness, yet her eyes remained sharp and focused. Outside the room, my mother was pacing the hallway, taking phone calls about the estate and discussing the family assets before my grandmother had even taken her final breath. For a few brief minutes, it was just my grandmother and me in the room. She reached out and took my hand with surprising strength. "Come closer, sweetheart. There are things I must tell you, things your mother can never find out." I leaned in, feeling both confused and alarmed by the urgency in her voice. She studied my face carefully, as if fixing my features in her memory. "I see how she treats you," she said softly, "as if you were an inconvenience, a reminder of a man she could not bend to her will." She was talking about my father, her son. The man Victoria had married, who died when I was 5. My mother never spoke of him, and whenever I brought him up, she would change the subject with a coldness that made me stop asking. My grandmother's eyes, clouded by medication moments before, suddenly grew remarkably clear. "Your father was my greatest pride," she said, "and you are his legacy, not hers, never hers. I have made sure she cannot take away what belongs to you." I did not understand. "Grandma, what belongs to me?" She glanced nervously toward the door. "Not now. She is listening. She is always listening." She squeezed my hand tightly. "When you are ready to leave that house, and one day you will, check the suitcase I gave you for your 13th birthday. I hid something inside it for you." I was only 15 then, still naive enough to think that family meant safety. She saw my confusion, and her expression softened for a brief moment. "Promise me, Elena. Promise me you will never mention this conversation to anyone. Not to Meredith, not to Richard, and especially not to your mother." I promised her. I did not fully grasp what I was agreeing to, but I trusted her completely. She was the only person in that household who had ever shown me true warmth. She nodded with quiet satisfaction, then leaned even closer, lowering her voice to a faint whisper. "When the time comes, there is someone who will assist you, a lawyer named Harold Whitman. He holds what is rightfully yours, things your mother attempted to hide." Her eyes held mine firmly. "Do not let her break your spirit, Elena. You are far stronger than she realizes. My mother's voice interrupted from the doorway. Elena, visiting hours are over. Let your grandmother rest. I tried to pull my hand back, but my grandmother held on tight, whispering one last sentence. The company was meant to be yours. George. I placed it in my original will, but she altered the documents when I was too weak to stand up to her. Whitman has the original copy. Go find him. Then she released her grip. My mother stepped into the room, and the moment was over. 3 days later, my grandmother passed away. I never had another moment alone with her. George. At the memorial service, Victoria smiled politely and accepted condolences like a figure of great authority. I stood there in quiet silence, holding my grandmother's words inside me, like a hidden secret I did not yet know how to use. Now, 2 years later, sitting in this inexpensive motel room, everything finally made sense. I held the envelope in my hands. George. My grandmother's handwriting was clear. For Elena, when you are ready to leave. I was ready now. I had no other choice. I carefully unsealed the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter along with a professional business card. The card read, Harold Whitman, attorney at law, based in Hartford, Connecticut. George. The letter was dated 3 years prior, back when my grandmother was still healthy and actively navigating her business affairs. The opening line of the letter made my heart freeze. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means your mother has finally shown you who she truly is. I kept reading as my vision blurred with tears. She laid out the entire story. George. Sterling Properties had been established through her own hard work after my grandfather passed away at a young age. Victoria had not married my father out of affection. She had married him to gain access to the family business. When my father died in that accident, Victoria stepped in to take full control. My grandmother had always questioned whether that accident was truly an equipment failure. George. She could never prove anything, but her doubts remained. My stomach felt tight. I had to pause, take a deep breath, and push myself to keep reading. 5 years before her passing, my grandmother had updated her will. She assigned a 51% controlling interest in Sterling Properties to me, set to be transferred officially when I turned 25. George. She provided a copy to Harold Whitman with strict instructions to keep it confidential. However, 6 months before her death, Victoria discovered the document. Victoria brought in her own legal representatives, while my grandmother was recovering from surgery and heavily medicated, coercing her into signing a revised will that transferred all authority to Victoria. George. They claimed to witnesses that my grandmother was confused and simply rectifying a mistake. She was too frail at the time to push back. Fortunately, my grandmother had already delivered the notarized original document from years earlier to Harold. Under the law, that original document remained valid. The concluding lines of the letter etched themselves into my memory. George. You are the rightful owner of Sterling Properties, Elena, not her. Locate Harold and recover what is yours. When you are ready, ensure she answers for everything she did to us. I read the letter 3 times until every sentence was clear in my mind. Then I placed it back into the secret lining of the suitcase, right where my grandmother had hidden it years ago. George. I looked at Harold Whitman's business card. Hartford was a 3-hour bus ride away. Part of me wanted to travel there immediately and demand answers. But reality quickly set in. I was 17, living out of a motel, with only $800 left. I was in no position to challenge Victoria. She had access to experienced legal teams, extensive capital, and a broad network of influence. George. I needed to survive first. I had to stand on my own 2 feet and learn how the professional world operated. Then, when the time was right, I would reach out to Harold Whitman. By the time I turned 25, I would reclaim what had been taken. I tucked the business card into my wallet and lay down on the worn motel bed. For the first time since leaving home, I did not feel helpless. George. I had a clear direction and a reason to move forward. I had not just left that mansion with a suitcase and $800. I had left with proof of a truth my mother thought she had successfully hidden away. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the motel, forwarded from my old boarding school. The return address read, Law Offices of Harold Whitman. Inside was a single sentence. George, your grandmother told me you would reach out eventually. I have been waiting. Call me when you are ready. Be cautious as your mother keeps close track of everything. 3 weeks after being turned out, I relocated to Bridgeport. It was far enough from Greenwich to stay clear of Victoria's social circles, yet close enough for me to plan my next steps. George. I secured a small room above a laundromat with a shared bathroom down the hall for $180 a week. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the neighbor's television at all hours, and the heating pipes clanked constantly, but it was a space that was entirely my own. My $800 lasted exactly 19 days. After that, surviving meant working until my body was exhausted, then pushing through to work even more. I took early morning shifts at a local coffee shop, worked as a delivery driver for a pharmacy in the afternoon, and served tables at a 24-hour diner on weekends. On good nights, I managed 5 hours of sleep. I ate one main meal a day, usually leftovers the diner manager let me take home after closing. My hands grew rough from constant dishwashing, and my feet were covered in blisters from standing 12 hours a day. Within 3 weeks, I lost 15 pounds simply because I could not afford to buy extra food. I kept Harold Whitman's business card tucked safely in my wallet behind my dwindling cash. I had not called him yet. I was still overwhelmed, low on funds, and focused entirely on day-to-day survival. The hardest part was not the physical strain or the cold meals. It was the rumors. Somehow, even 60 miles away from Greenwich, my mother's version of the story managed to reach me. It happened on a busy Saturday night at the diner. I was moving between tables with several plates balanced on my arm when 2 women walked in. They had designer handbags, neatly styled hair, and an easy demeanor. Their outfits alone cost more than my rent for several months. I recognized them right away. They were longtime acquaintances of Victoria and regular guests at our family functions. I kept my head down as I approached their table, hoping they would not pay close attention to a waitress in a worn apron. I was mistaken. One of the women stopped mid-sentence and gasped softly, "Goodness, is that Victoria Sterling's daughter?" Her friend leaned in, her voice easily carrying across the room. "The one who ran off?" I heard she got mixed up with trouble and had issues with the law. The tray trembled slightly in my hands. I forced myself to stay calm and keep a neutral expression, though my heart was beating rapidly. The first woman turned and looked at me with an expression of performative sympathy. "Sweetheart, does your mother know you are working here? She has been frantic with worry about you." Something inside me reached a breaking point. "My mother knows exactly where I am," I replied clearly. "She is the one who put me out." My response was sharper than intended. Both women stared at me, exchanging glances filled with silent judgment. The second woman shook her head. "Poor girl, clearly confused. Look at how thin she has become." Before I said anything that might cost me my job, I turned and walked away. My manager gave me a stern look from across the counter. I swallowed my frustration and kept working until my shift ended at midnight. Late that night in my small room, I borrowed a coworker's laptop and searched my own name online. What I discovered was deeply unsettling. Victoria had not simply forced me out. She had launched a full public relations effort to reshape the narrative before I ever had a chance to speak up. The story she presented was detailed and calculated. My troubled daughter experienced a severe emotional breakdown following her grandmother's passing. She got involved with dangerous individuals, developed harmful habits, took family funds, and vanished. In her narrative, Victoria presented herself as a grieving mother hoping for my recovery. Articles featured photos of her wiping away tears at public events, while receiving comfort from wealthy associates. Local papers even quoted her saying, "As a mother, my heart is heavy." But we cannot assist those who refuse to accept help. I stared at the screen, a deep frustration building inside me. I wanted to reveal the truth and set the record straight. But who would take the word of an unsheltered 17-year-old over Victoria Sterling, a prominent public figure and business executive? In that moment, her strategy became crystal clear. She had not done this merely to punish me for leaving. It was a strategic effort to dismantle my credibility ahead of time. If I ever stepped forward with my grandmother's original will, Victoria could point to these articles and claim I was an unstable individual fabricating stories for financial gain. She had constructed her defense long before I even considered taking legal action. It was a cold, calculated effort to eliminate my standing in society. My mother was not just harsh, she was exceptionally methodical. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Then I pulled out a small notepad and wrote down 3 guidelines. Keep all records. Document every detail. Exercise patience. January arrived with freezing weather and persistent fatigue. One afternoon, while delivering pharmaceutical supplies, I accidentally stepped into the wrong office suite. The sign on the door read, Chen Properties, Boutique Real Estate Solutions. A woman in her 50s looked up from her desk, her sharp gaze taking in my worn coat and the delivery bag in my hand. You have the wrong floor, she said calmly. Then she paused and looked at me more closely. You look as though you haven't slept in weeks. Sit down for a moment before you collapse. I intended to decline, but the steady authority in her voice stopped me. She poured me a cup of warm tea and began asking basic questions. Where I had attended school, where I was currently working, and how old I was. I found myself answering her honestly. I was simply too exhausted to invent a story. When I mentioned Greenwich Academy, her demeanor shifted noticeably. Greenwich, she noted. Do you happen to know the Sterling family? I hesitated briefly before deciding to tell her the truth. I had nothing left to lose. Victoria Sterling is my mother. She forced me out 2 months ago. The woman, whose name was Diane Chen, leaned back in her chair and observed me with renewed focus. What she shared next changed my perspective completely. Victoria Sterling ruined my husband's business 15 years ago, Diane stated plainly. She undercut our project bids, circulated false claims about our materials, and filed baseless complaints that led to his license being suspended. He never recovered professionally. 3 years later, he passed away from a heart condition. She looked at me with something I had not encountered in a long time, genuine respect. So, you managed to walk away from her as well. We spoke for hours. I did not mention the original will or Harold Whitman, as it was still too early to share such sensitive information. But I explained the ultimatum I was given, the arranged marriage offer, and the false stories Victoria was circulating. Diane listened attentively without interrupting, nodding slowly as I spoke. Your mother operates like a predator, Diane observed. She identifies vulnerabilities and uses them to her advantage. The only way to stand up to someone like her is to build a position she cannot easily break. Then she offered me an opportunity, a part-time internship at Chen Properties. There would be no salary initially, but I would learn the operational side of real estate, observe how transactions were structured, and understand how influence functioned in the industry. This is not a handout, Diane explained. I am offering you knowledge, the very knowledge your mother never wanted you to gain. Something clicked in my mind. My grandmother had built Sterling Properties from nothing. Diane had built Chen Properties back up after facing severe setbacks. Perhaps I did not need to wait until I turned 25 to take action. Perhaps I could start building my own leverage right now. I accepted her offer that very day. February brought freezing rain, along with a small sense of confidence that I could handle what lay ahead. I worked at the coffee shop in the mornings, interned at Chen Properties in the afternoons, and served tables on weekends. The schedule was demanding, but for the first time, I was acquiring real skills rather than just surviving. Then, at 2 a.m, my phone vibrated. It was an unrecognized number. I almost ignored it, but something prompted me to answer. Porch. A faint whisper came through the line. Elena, it is Meredith. My heart rate spiked immediately. I had not heard my sister's voice since the night I left. She was crying softly. I cannot stay on long. Mom monitors my phone calls. What happened? I asked quickly. Are you all right? I am okay. Well, not really. Things are difficult here. Since you left, Mom has changed. Porch. She is much more strict and suspicious. I wanted to reassure her, but I also remembered how she had stood silently on the stairs when I was cast out. Why are you calling me, Meredith? Her voice grew even lower. I found documents in Mom's office. Files concerning Grandma's estate. My pulse raced. What kind of documents? Porch. I do not understand all the legal terms, but there are 2 different versions of Grandma's will. One of them names you throughout the document. Mom keeps it locked away. She does not know I saw it. My hand trembled as I held the phone tightly. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the background on her end. Meredith gasped quietly. Someone is coming, I have to go. Wait, I urged quickly. Porch. Can you make copies? The call disconnected. I sat in the dark room, holding the phone against my chest as my heart pounded. My younger sister had just become an unexpected contact inside my mother's house. Yet I understood the risk clearly. If Victoria discovered Meredith was speaking to me, Meredith would face severe consequences of her own. I needed to remain careful and patient. Porch. I had to secure those records before my mother made them disappear permanently. 6 months after leaving the estate, I finally found the resolve to make the call. I had turned 18, making me an adult under the law, no longer a minor who could be returned home by authorities. For months, I had looked at Harold Whitman's business card, wondering about the specifics behind that contact number. Porch. After Meredith's late-night call regarding the 2 wills, I realized I could not delay any longer. Something was happening at the mansion, and I needed answers before Victoria erased any remaining paper trail. At the office, Diane noticed I was distracted, staring off into space while reviewing real estate contracts. She asked what was on my mind. Porch. I shared a portion of the situation. I need to meet with an attorney who advised my grandmother. I am uncertain about what I might learn. Diane looked at me directly. Uncertainty will not protect you. It only delays the inevitable. Whatever facts you have to address, you can face them now or face them later, but they will still be there. That evening, I dialed the number listed on the card. Porch. The phone rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. I was wondering how long it would take for you to reach out. Your grandmother mentioned you would need time to find your footing. It appears she was correct. Harold Whitman sounded older and tired, but beneath that tone was a sharp focus that reminded me of my grandmother. Porch. He confirmed he had served as Margaret's personal legal counsel for over 30 years, acting as a trusted advisor and confidant. A week after your grandmother's memorial, your mother ended my services, he explained. She did not even invite me to the service, but your grandmother anticipated those moves well in advance. She made proper preparations. We cannot meet at my office. Porch. Your mother has people keeping an eye on me. Nor can we meet anywhere in Connecticut, as the risk is too high. He suggested meeting in a small town in upstate New York called Rhinebeck. There was a diner there named Martha's Kitchen, a favorite spot of his late wife. Come alone, he instructed. Do not tell anyone, and, Elena, bring something that proves you are truly Margaret's granddaughter. Porch. Photos, letters, anything. I need to be certain this is not a setup. A setup? I repeated. Why would anyone set a trap for you? There was a long pause on the line, then his voice dropped to nearly a whisper. Because your mother has already tried twice. Once by sending a private investigator posing as a journalist, and another time by bringing in a woman claiming to be a distant relative. Porch. She knows I hold something, she just does not know what it is. My blood ran cold. Victoria was not merely covering her tracks, she was actively searching for evidence. Harold Whitman had guarded this secret for 2 full years on my behalf, and my mother would stop at nothing to locate it first. Late in May, at 6 on a Saturday morning, a Greyhound bus pulled out of Bridgeport. Porch. Sitting by the window, I watched the scenery transition from suburban developments into rolling hills dotted with farms and woodland. I brought my grandmother's necklace, the original letter hidden in the suitcase, and a photo from my 15th birthday, where she and I were laughing together in the garden. Those 3 items would confirm my identity. Porch. The 3-hour journey gave me time to process everything I knew. My grandmother's whispered words in the hospital room, the letter tucked away in the luggage, the 2 wills Meredith had spotted, and now Harold Whitman holding the document that could change everything. Porch. Staring out the window, I wondered how different life might be if my grandmother were still alive, if my father had not passed away, or if my mother had chosen care over calculation. But experience taught me that dwelling on hypothetical scenarios was useless. The only option was to keep moving forward. As the bus arrived in Rhinebeck, I noticed a black SUV parked across from the station. Porch. It had tinted windows and Connecticut license plates. My heart skipped a beat. Had Victoria found out? Was I stepping into a trap? I froze in my seat, holding my breath, staring at the vehicle. Then the driver's side door opened, and an elderly woman using a walker stepped out, moving slowly toward a pharmacy next door. It was just a coincidence. Porch. Yet that feeling of caution did not fade. It simply became a permanent part of how I operated. Martha's kitchen matched my expectations of a small-town diner, complete with red vinyl booths and the aroma of coffee and bacon. During Saturday lunch, the room was filled with families, truck drivers, and elderly couples sharing dessert. Looking around, I spotted him in a corner booth. Porch. He had white hair and wore a slightly worn suit that had clearly been of high quality years ago. He pretended to read a newspaper while keeping an eye on the entrance. I walked over slowly. Mr. Whitman? He studied me for a long moment, his gaze sharp despite his age. Then he gave a subtle nod. You have Margaret's eyes, please, sit. Porch. I slid into the booth across from him and placed my items on the table. The necklace, the letter, and the photograph. He examined each item carefully, holding the letter up to the light and running his thumb over my grandmother's handwriting. This is her writing, he said finally. I would recognize it anywhere. She actually wrote this letter in my office, with me acting as a witness. Porch. She said that one day you would need proof that she loved you. My eyes stung, but I held back the tears. Not here and not now. Whitman reached into his briefcase and retrieved a thick, heavy envelope sealed with red wax. This, he whispered, is Margaret Eleanor Sterling's true final will. Porch. Signed, notarized, and witnessed 6 years ago on March 15th, 2 full years before your mother produced her alternative version. He slid the document across the table. With trembling hands, I read through the terms. The clauses of the original will were clear and specific. Porch. It allocated a 51% controlling interest in Sterling properties to Elena Margaret Sterling upon reaching the age of 25. 15% went to Meredith. 34% was left to Victoria, accompanied by strict restrictions. Victoria could not sell, merge, or restructure the firm without board approval. Porch. Furthermore, my grandmother had established an independent educational trust completely outside Victoria's reach. The family estate in Vermont, my grandmother's favorite property, was left directly to me. Whitman explained the details in a low tone, occasionally glancing toward the door. Margaret knew your mother would attempt to take control after her passing. Porch. She structured the will to grant you majority ownership, but restricted full control until age 25. She hoped that by then, you would be mature enough to manage the responsibility and respond if necessary. The educational trust was intended to cover your college expenses. Porch. However, Victoria petitioned the court to freeze those funds, claiming you had left home, could not be located, and refused to communicate. I felt a sudden wave of disgust. Even from the grave, my grandmother had attempted to protect me. Meanwhile, Victoria had dismantled every safeguard, taking away every resource until I was left with nothing. Orch. How did she falsify the will? My voice sounded firmer than I expected. Whitman's expression grew serious. 6 months before your grandmother passed, Victoria obtained power of attorney. She bribed a doctor named Gerald Hoffman to issue a medical statement declaring Margaret mentally incapacitated. Orch. Then, while your grandmother was heavily medicated after surgery, Victoria brought in her legal team. They produced a new will, had Margaret sign while her mind was clouded, and submitted it to probate court before anyone could raise an objection. Can we prove it was falsified? Whitman let out a deep sigh. Orch. I hold the original will, along with statements confirming your grandmother was completely lucid in the months preceding that surgery. I also have valid doubts regarding that doctor. However, doubts do not equal legal proof, and your mother spent 2 full years covering her actions. He looked directly at me. If we go to court today, it becomes a matter of conflicting statements. Orch. She has substantial financial resources, top legal counsel, and an established public image. You are currently working as a restaurant server and a real estate intern. His words weighed heavily on me, laying out the harsh reality. I needed more than just the original will. I required clear, undeniable proof of the falsification. I needed witnesses willing to testify in court. Orch. I needed time, resources, and a level of influence I did not yet possess. Whitman provided copies of all relevant documents, the original will, his legal notes, and a detailed timeline of events. He instructed me to store them where Victoria could never locate them, far away from my apartment or personal digital files. Your mother commands extensive resources, he warned me. Orch. Private investigators, security specialists, and individuals who handle sensitive matters quietly. I understood his point. I could not challenge Victoria head-on right now. I had to wait until I turned 25, which was 7 full years away. However, I could use those 7 years to build a compelling case. Orch. I would document every poor business decision Victoria made at Sterling Properties, locate the physician who signed the false medical report, identify staff and former household employees who could serve as witnesses, and, most importantly, achieve financial independence so she could not ruin me simply by cutting off my funds. Orch. Your mother is not careless, Whitman cautioned as I stood up to leave. She is suspicious, but she is also patient. Right now, she views you as a failed runaway, an inconvenience to be forgotten. Let her keep thinking that. Because the moment she realizes you pose a threat, she will use every tool available to stop you. So I remain patient, I said. Orch. I stay quiet and let her assume she won the situation, until the day I am fully prepared to show otherwise. He gave a slow nod, then took my wrist with a firm grip. There is one more detail. Your grandmother left something else behind. It is entirely separate from the will and completely private, held in a bank safe, deposit box in Vermont. Orch. She said you would know what to do once you saw the contents. His expression turned serious. However, Elena, she also mentioned that what is inside that box has the potential to ruin far more than just your mother's reputation. Before you open it, you must be entirely certain you are ready for whatever comes with it. Orch. Leaving Martha's kitchen, I carried a folder of documents in my bag and held the safe deposit box key tightly in my hand, with a clearer understanding of what lay ahead. This was no longer just about property or inheritance. My grandmother had gathered critical information, keeping it hidden until someone was ready to address it. Now, that responsibility rested with me. Orch. I simply needed to stay focused long enough to become the capable person she believed I could be. 2 years after being put out of the house, I barely recognized my former self. At 19, I was no longer staying in inexpensive motels or relying on leftover meals from the diner. Orch. Working full-time, I earned my GED and enrolled in online college courses covering business administration and real estate law. I studied until late every night, viewing sleep as a temporary luxury I could not afford to prioritize. Diane Chen promoted me from an unpaid intern to a junior assistant, making me the youngest person in her firm's history to hold that title. Porch. She became more than a mentor. Though neither of us stated it outright, she provided the steady guidance I had lacked for so long. I managed smaller property deals independently, building a quiet reputation in local real estate circles as a dedicated worker who paid attention to every detail. I kept my hair short for a professional appearance and dressed simply in well-fitted clothes. I learned to keep my composure, maintaining a calm exterior regardless of the situation. I had adopted a composed demeanor, but mine served a clear purpose. Beneath the surface, my determination remained steady, serving as a constant source of motivation. On the 2-year anniversary of the night I left the estate, I executed a plan I had been preparing for months. I met with a loan officer at a bank and completed my first actual real estate purchase, a distressed duplex in Norwalk, Connecticut. It was in such poor condition that few buyers were interested. I purchased it for $32,000, funds I had carefully saved from every paycheck, tip and side job I could find. The building needed extensive work, broken windows, damaged flooring, and multiple roof leaks, yet it belonged to me. For the first time in my life, I truly owned a property. I spent 4 months handling the renovations myself during my off hours. I learned basic plumbing techniques through online instructional videos, self-taught basic electrical wiring, patched drywall, and painted the entire interior. My hands grew calloused, and after long days, my muscles ached. But I kept working, knowing every improvement I made built a firm foundation between my current life and the night I left the mansion with nothing. Diane assisted me with navigating municipal permits and city inspections. I hired licensed contractors only for essential work required by code, such as updating the main electrical panel. When the duplex eventually sold for $78,000, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing the figures. The transaction netted $19,000 in clear profit. I did not count the money out of greed. I counted it because it represented real security. Every dollar was a step toward ensuring I would never have to rely on anyone else's terms again. I would earn everything I needed on my own merit. I immediately reinvested those funds into 2 more distressed properties in working-class neighborhoods, followed by a third and a fourth. Late at night, after finishing my daily work, I monitored developments at Sterling Properties. I set up news alerts to track every media mention, financial report, and public filing. Everything I observed confirmed Harold Whitman's warnings. Victoria was mismanaging the company my grandmother had built. She completed costly acquisitions with poor returns. Key executives departed for competing firms. Quarterly debt levels rose while revenue stalled, and client lawsuits regarding contract delays began to mount. Victoria's rigid management style was driving her own decline. She was overly suspicious, insisted on micromanaging every detail, refused to delegate authority, and trusted no one. The board of directors grew uneasy, yet they were too intimidated to challenge her directly. I recorded all of these developments in a private notebook, documenting every poor decision, financial misstep, and executive resignation. I was assembling a clear timeline of operational failure, not just for personal reasons, but to serve as evidence when the time was right. There was a quiet logic to the situation. My mother had cast me out to protect her enterprise, yet 4 years later, she was dismantling it through her own choices. I did not need to actively bring down Sterling Properties. I simply had to be prepared to step in once the damage was done. Meredith and I maintained a secure method of staying in touch. We used prepaid burner phones, replacing them every few months and keeping the numbers strictly between the two of us. After that brief midnight call regarding the 2 wills disconnected, I had prepared for the worst. But 3 months later, a message arrived using a childhood code word, letting me know she was safe. Now 17, Meredith remained at the mansion, continuing to play the role of the compliant daughter. Privately, however, she served as an observant source inside the home. She kept me informed about everything. Victoria's unpredictable temper, her growing suspicion towards staff and board members, Richard moving into a separate bedroom while remaining silent during family dinners, and the uncomfortable atmosphere steadily building inside the house. One Saturday afternoon, my secondary phone vibrated. It was Meredith's number. When I answered, her voice sounded strange, tense, restrained, almost devoid of emotion like a machine. Elena. Mom had a secret door meeting with old Harrison last week. When she came out, she looked terrified. I have never seen her look afraid before. My blood instantly ran cold. The Harrisons, the very family Victoria had once tried to sell me to. They were still in the game. And whatever my mother owed them, it carried enough leverage to cause her genuine fear. I cautioned Meredith to be careful, to keep observing, but above all, to protect herself. After disconnecting the call, I sat in the dark for a long time, mentally calculating the variables. What kind of questionable transaction had Victoria entered into with those people? And when the moment of accounting arrived, what price would that debt demand from her? By my 4th year of living independently, I turned 21. I was no longer working at diners or coffee shops. Real estate had become my full-time profession. My asset portfolio had grown steadily. I had renovated and sold 8 properties, while holding 3 residential units that generated passive monthly income. My net worth was approaching $200,000. All assets were held under a limited liability company I had incorporated. I named the company Phoenix Holdings, rising from the ashes. Diane made me a partner at Chen Properties, making me the youngest partner in the firm's history. My true identity was not made public. I operated entirely behind the scenes through the LLC, maintaining a silent presence. To the wealthy social circles of Greenwich, Victoria's troubled daughter had vanished years ago, likely coming to an unfortunate end or passing time in a facility somewhere. I allowed them to continue believing that version of events. Staying unnoticed was my most effective tool. I began attending high-level real estate industry conferences, building relationships with investors, contractors, and attorneys, while quietly mapping out Victoria's rivals, and her rivals were numerous. By then, rumors about her were widespread, extremely difficult to work with, lacking professional integrity, and suffering severe financial strain. I cataloged every name, every network of relationships, and every piece of commercial intelligence. I was still 4 years away from turning 25, the age when I could legally claim my inheritance. But I was not simply waiting. I was constructing a parallel enterprise, a force strong enough to counter the very empire that had been taken from me. When the day came for me to finally reveal my presence, I could not be merely a desperate person holding a piece of paper. I had to be a force that Victoria could neither ignore, minimize, nor dismantle. One day in April, a commercial real estate broker I had met at an industry conference called me. "There is an asset going up for auction next month," she said. A parcel of land in the New Haven Port Warehouse District. Multiple bidders are expected, including Sterling Properties. I smiled into the receiver. "Send me all the documentation." The auction took place in a banquet hall at a high-end hotel in Hartford. I attended as the representative of Phoenix Holdings, dressed in a tailored dark suit, wearing non-prescription glasses, with my hair pulled back neatly. My posture and presence were completely different from the 17-year-old who had left the mansion years ago. I scanned the room of attorneys, developers, and investors. Then, I saw her. Victoria walked in as if she owned the venue. She wore a designer dress, had immaculate hair, and carried that familiar smile. Richard followed behind her, looking worn out and completely drained of authority. They took their seats in the front row, displaying their usual posture of absolute confidence. I walked to a corner in the back row and sat down, observing quietly. The auction began. I analyzed Victoria's strategy closely. Her bidding was overly aggressive, driven by sheer arrogance, pushing the price far beyond the parcel's actual market value. Allowing ego and vanity to override precise financial calculation is a major vulnerability in real estate. Following my original plan, I withdrew from the bidding early and watched calmly as she secured the land. She overpaid by at least 15%. My records gained another instance of her poor judgment, adding yet another flaw to her foundation. After the auction concluded, the crowd moved toward the exit. I found myself walking directly behind Victoria, close enough to smell her perfume. Chanel No. 5, the scent that had accompanied my entire childhood. She was on the phone, sternly complaining about contractor delays and employee incompetence. As she passed through the doorway, her elbow brushed against my arm. She offered no apology and did not even look back. I paused where I stood, watching her walk away. "Enjoy your remaining days, mother," I said softly. "Your time is running out." "Excuse me, aren't you Victoria Sterling's daughter?" The sudden voice behind me made my whole body freeze. I turned around slowly to face a man I did not recognize. He was tall, with dark hair, looking at me with an uncomfortably sharp gaze. "I have no idea what you are talking about," I replied calmly. But the look in his eyes told me he did not believe a single word. The stranger's gaze remained locked on me, creating an intense pressure. I maintained a completely blank expression, a composed mask I had perfected over 5 years of grueling independent survival. As I said, I emphasized again, "I don't know what you mean." He offered a brief smile that held no genuine warmth, only the certainty of someone confirming a realization. "That may be my mistake. You simply bear a striking resemblance to someone I have researched for a long time." He handed me a business card before I could respond, speaking as he did so. Nathan Cole. Cole Development Group. The name struck my memory immediately. Cole Development Group was one of Sterling Properties' primary competitors. I had seen their name in trade publications, watching them win major contracts that Victoria had sought, and noting their rapid growth over the past decade. And now, their CEO stood right in front of me, stating that he knew exactly who I was. I placed the card into my pocket without glancing down at it. "An interesting firm," I said carefully. "I hear your company has performed well recently." Nathan tilted his head slightly, studying me like a puzzle he was determined to solve. "We have indeed, though we owe some of that to Victoria Sterling. She once attempted to ruin us, but she failed." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "I am not here to expose you, Elena. I am here because we share common ground. We both want to watch Victoria Sterling's operations collapse." He spoke casually, as if discussing the weather, but his eyes told a completely different story. There was deep resentment there, the kind born only from severe personal loss. Whatever Victoria had done to this man, it went far beyond standard business rivalry. It was an open conflict. Eventually, we sat down in a quiet corner of the hotel lounge, 2 untouched drinks resting between us. I remained highly alert, watching for any sign that this might be a setup. But the frustration in Nathan's voice felt entirely genuine. That raw intensity could not be faked. He shared his story, and with every word, my understanding of my mother's harsh methods was expanded once again. His father, Robert Cole, had founded Cole Development Group in the 1980s from scratch. For years, Sterling Properties and Cole Development operated as healthy competitors, occasionally collaborating on joint projects with mutual respect. However, when Nathan was 18, everything shifted. His father secured the largest contract of his career, a multi-million-dollar waterfront development project in Stamford. Victoria wanted that contract. Instead of competing through legitimate business channels, she set out to dismantle Robert Cole professionally and socially. She circulated claims that Cole Development was using substandard construction materials, and she bribed building inspectors to submit false safety violation reports. Robert Cole's business license was suspended pending an investigation. By the time he was finally cleared 18 months later, he had lost everything. Clients had walked away, and his professional standing was ruined. He filed for bankruptcy and was never able to recover. 6 months later, Robert Cole passed away from a heart condition. Nathan was only 20 years old, burying his father while Victoria Sterling hosted a celebratory event using the contract she had taken. She didn't just defeat him. Nathan's voice was low and restrained. She erased his legacy. She ensured no one would remember Robert Cole as anything other than a failure. He passed away feeling completely defeated. Nathan looked at me, his gaze intense. When I was 20, standing by my father's grave, I resolved to recover everything she had taken. I spent 12 years building the strength to do so, and now I discover that Victoria's own daughter is working toward the same outcome. This is not a coincidence. It is a significant opportunity. Prudence told me to walk away. Every instinct developed over 5 years of survival cautioned me that trusting anyone carried severe risks. Victoria was skilled at turning people against each other, and it was entirely possible she had positioned Nathan to draw me out. Yet something in his account resonated deeply with my own experience. I understood what it felt like to lose a father because of Victoria. I knew the persistent anger and the drive for fairness that shaped every decision. I also recognized that I had been gathering evidence alone for far too long. I needed resources, professional networks, and documentation I could not collect entirely on my own. Nathan possessed all of those assets. The question was whether I could trust him enough to share what I knew. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "For all I know, you could be working alongside her." This could be another trap. Nathan reflected for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and displayed a photograph. His father, frail and pale, lay in a hospital bed. The image was painful to see. The man looked 80 years old, though he could not have been older than 50 at the time. This was taken 2 days before he passed. Nathan's voice cracked slightly. He was only 53. Victoria Sterling took everything from him: his business, his standing, and his will to keep going. He put the phone away. "I do not work for her. I exist to bring an end to her influence." I believed him. Perhaps it was unwise, or perhaps 5 years of isolation made me receptive to an ally. But looking into Nathan's eyes, I saw a reflection of my own experience. Two people impacted by the same individual, both gathering strength for a final accounting. For the next hour, we discussed strategy. I did not disclose everything. I made no mention of the original will, Harold Whitman, or the safe deposit box in Vermont. I kept my strongest assets private to maintain my leverage. But I shared enough. Being turned out at 17, the arranged marriage offer I rejected, and the false narrative Victoria circulated to damage my standing. Nathan listened quietly without interrupting, giving slow nods. He also shared what he had gathered over 12 years of investigation. Delaware shell companies Victoria used to conceal assets, payments to zoning officials tracked through complex financial records, and altered environmental reports that allowed Sterling Properties to build in protected zones. Together, we began mapping out the full scope of Victoria's deceptive practices. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Nathan's downtown Hartford office, surrounded by whiteboards covered with timelines and pinned documents. We had been meeting there quietly, staying late into the early morning hours, working through piles of evidence and refining our approach over takeout boxes. Nathan possessed resources I had long needed: forensic accountants, private investigators, and a legal team ready to take action. Furthermore, he held years of archived records I had never seen. The complete picture that emerged was darker than I had anticipated. Victoria's improper practices extended far beyond basic financial greed. Using the same methods that ruined the Cole family, she had brought down at least 4 other businesses. She had influenced judicial officers, manipulated land transactions, and likely pressured a state senator who attempted to investigate her business methods. Nathan expressed respect for my discipline, analytical approach, and steady patience. In turn, I valued his extensive resources, strategic thinking, and a shared drive to hold Victoria accountable. Underneath all the cold planning, something else began to develop beneath the surface. One night, past midnight, we were reviewing discrepancies in Sterling Properties' third-quarter financial filings. Nathan reached across the desk for a document, and his hand briefly brushed against mine. Both of us froze for a fraction of a second. Neither moved. The atmosphere in the room felt suddenly charged with an unspoken tension neither of us was prepared to address. I withdrew my hand and reached for my coffee instead. We should maintain our focus, I said, my voice far more composed than my rapid pulse. Nathan nodded, though his gaze rested on my face a moment longer. We both recognized that something was shifting between us. Yet we also understood that, until Victoria was dealt with, we could not afford any distractions. 6 months into our alliance, I turned 23, standing just steps away from bringing down Victoria's position entirely. That was when Meredith called. When I answered the secondary phone, her voice sounded unnaturally stiff, restrained, and mechanical. "Elena, how have you been lately? I have been thinking about you." My instincts signaled that something was wrong. Meredith never engaged in casual small talk. Over the years, we had developed a coded system where specific phrases indicated levels of risk. "How is the weather over there?" meant, "Are you being monitored?" I answered carefully. "There have been a lot of storms recently. Very heavy storms." My blood ran cold. Victoria was monitoring the call. Meredith continued in a strangely flat tone. "I hope the weather clears up soon. Mom says everything will be fine. She has been showing a lot of concern for me lately. A great deal of concern." Those words hit me like ice water. Victoria had sensed something, perhaps discovered a detail, or begun to suspect Meredith's loyalty. My younger sister was sitting in that mansion, playing the role of the compliant daughter, while our mother circled like a predator sensing a vulnerability. "I have to go," Meredith said. "Mom is calling me for dinner. Love you." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I called Nathan immediately. "We have a problem. Victoria is focused on Meredith. We need to move up our timeline." 2 weeks later, at 3 in the morning, my phone rang repeatedly from Meredith's secondary number. I woke from my sleep and answered right away. This time, her voice was no longer restrained. It held complete, pure panic, so faint it sounded like it could be swept away by a breeze. "Elena, I made a mistake. She found the phone. She knows everything." I sat up straight in bed. "What happened?" "Richard, he was searching my room. I don't know why. He found my hidden spot. He took the phone straight to Mom." My heart pounded so hard I could barely think. "What did she do?" Meredith described the encounter in broken sentences. Victoria's face turned pale, then flushed with intense anger. She shouted at Meredith for an hour, calling her a traitor and deceitful. "Just like your sister." She demanded to know exactly what information Meredith had shared with me. Meredith lied, claiming she had only called to ask me to return home. Victoria did not believe it for a second. "She took my phone, my laptop, everything. I am locked in my room. There are people outside my door. I think it's private security." "She cannot do that," I said through gritted teeth. "You are 19 years old, an adult. That is unlawful confinement." Meredith's voice broke. "She doesn't care. She said if I try to leave, she will have me committed to a mental health facility. She has a physician who will sign the authorization. The same physician who signed for Grandma. The exact same doctor. The exact same method. The questionable tactic Victoria once used to alter my grandmother's will was now being directed at my sister. Elena." Meredith broke down crying. "I am terrified. The way she looked at me was the same way she used to look at you, as if I am no longer her daughter, just an inconvenience to be handled." I heard footsteps in the background on her end. Someone was approaching. "I have to go. Please, please help me. Don't let her do to me what she did to Grandma. Don't let her make me vanish." The call disconnected. I grabbed my car keys, put on a jacket, and picked up the entire box of evidence files Nathan and I had assembled. Victoria had finally committed an irreversible error. She had revealed her true nature to Meredith. A figure willing to sacrifice her own child to protect her web of lies. Now Meredith was no longer just an information source. She was an essential witness. More importantly, she was my sister. I had spent 6 years constructing a business presence to challenge Victoria, but that objective could wait another day. Tonight was a rescue operation. May anyone who tried to stand in my way be prepared for the consequences. At 3 in the morning, Nathan's office functioned like an emergency command center. A map of Greenwich was spread across the table. Security personnel were on standby, and attorneys were prepared to step in if legal issues arose. I paced the room anxiously while Nathan made continuous phone calls, mobilizing extensive resources I could never have gathered on my own. The situation was even more concerning than Meredith had described. Nathan's contact inside the Greenwich Police Department shared troubling news. Victoria had already filed a police report that evening, claiming Meredith was experiencing a severe psychological crisis and posed a danger to herself. She was already constructing a paper trail. If we attempted to take Meredith by force and Victoria contacted law enforcement, authorities would treat us as abductors and view Meredith as an individual requiring immediate medical custody under her mother's care. This was no longer a straightforward extraction. It was a race against a legal trap. Nathan's security team consisted of 2 former military specialists who executed orders with precision. We had an attorney specializing in emergency custody disputes on call, along with a psychiatrist prepared to evaluate Meredith the moment she was secured and issue documentation certifying her mental fitness. The layout of the mansion was intimately familiar to me. After all, I had lived there for 17 years. The details Meredith had provided over recent years proved essential. Security guards shifted posts at 4 in the morning, leaving a 15-minute gap. Her room faced the rear garden and could be reached via the staff corridor. Victoria slept in the primary suite on the opposite side of the house, while Richard had long since moved to the guest wing. If we moved quickly and quietly, we could extract Meredith before anyone realized what was happening. If we failed, Victoria would use that police report to legally institutionalize my sister, and I would lose her permanently. We drove toward Greenwich through the darkness. 6 years earlier, I had walked that same route on foot with a single suitcase and $800. Everything appeared unchanged. The manicured hedges, the iron gates, and the wealthy families projecting quiet modesty while quietly dismantling anyone who threatened their standing. Nathan sat beside me in the back seat of the black SUV, his hand occasionally resting lightly on mine to offer quiet support. The 2 specialists in the front remained silent. They had completed many extraction operations, though likely few involving a private residence in Connecticut. When the Sterling estate appeared through the trees, my breath caught for a moment. This was the house where I grew up, the structure I fled, the place where my grandmother passed away and my mother took everything. Childhood memories flashed involuntarily, playing by the fountain, my grandmother teaching me about the garden flowers, and the window of my old room now completely dark, likely converted to another use long ago. Long before driving me out, Victoria had erased my presence from that home. We parked 2 blocks away and proceeded on foot. The security specialists confirmed the guard rotation was taking place. Nathan's technical specialist had overridden the electronic lock on the rear entrance an hour earlier. We moved quietly through the shadows of the garden. I led the way, as years of sneaking out past curfew had made me familiar with every path and hidden corner. As we approached the rear of the house, I saw something that made me freeze. A flickering light inside Meredith's window. Not an electric light, but the glow of a candle. The curtain moved slightly, and I caught a glimpse of my sister's pale, frightened face pressed against the glass. She was waiting for us. She knew we would come. The question was, Who else knew? Porch. The staff entrance door still had the old lock I had learned to pick as a teenager. With a faint click, it opened. We moved through the corridor, passing the kitchen where I used to hide during my mother's dinner parties. 12 steps led up to the second floor. The 7th step creaked, so I instinctively stepped over it. Porch. A guard's chair sat outside Meredith's door, but it was empty, the rotation gap. I knocked softly 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. It was our childhood signal from when we used to sneak into each other's rooms at night to escape the cold atmosphere of the house. The door opened slightly, revealing Meredith's face, covered in tears, exhausted, but safe. Elena. Thank goodness, Elena. Porch. She threw her arms around me. For a moment, I held her tightly, feeling her tremble. Then I pulled back gently. We need to leave immediately. Did you bring what you need? Meredith nodded, grabbing a backpack she had prepared earlier. Everything I could gather. Emails, financial records, copies of the altered will, and an audio recording of Mom threatening to have me committed. Porch. Direct evidence. Victoria's own words, recorded and preserved. You recorded her? I whispered in surprise. Meredith's expression showed a cold resolve I had never seen in her before. I started recording months ago. Every conversation, every threat, every admission. She assumed I was the compliant, unquestioning daughter, and never checked my room for recording devices. Porch. My younger sister had acted as an observer in her own home, collecting evidence capable of dismantling Victoria's defense. Just 10 feet from the staff staircase, a light suddenly switched on behind us. Richard stood at the end of the hallway in a robe, holding his phone. His face was pale and full of conflict, but his finger hovered directly over the keypad. Porch. I knew you would come, he said quietly. Victoria said you would. She has been waiting. I stepped in front of Meredith immediately, protecting her with my body. Richard, don't do this. His voice sounded strained. I have no choice. If I let you go, she will ruin me. She will destroy you eventually anyway, I said sharply. You know that. Porch. You've seen how she treats anyone who is no longer useful to her. Richard hesitated. I could see the fear in his eyes, a genuine, pure terror of the woman he shared a home with. Not loyalty, not affection, only fear. I never wanted to be part of any of this, he said. When I married her, I thought she was I had no idea she was capable of. Then testify against her in court, I said. Porch. We can provide you protection. He offered a bitter smile. No one can protect me. You don't know what I helped her accomplish. If she goes down, I go down with her. His thumb moved toward the call button. At that moment, Meredith stepped forward from behind me. Her voice was cold as ice. Dad, if you press that button, I will tell them everything. About the deal with the Harrisons. Porch. About what actually happened to Elena's father. And about the funds in those offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Richard's face drained of color completely. How do you know about that? Meredith offered a cold smile. I told you, I was always listening. Richard slowly lowered his phone. Porch. Whatever critical secret Meredith had uncovered, it was enough to make his fear of his daughter outweigh his fear of Victoria. In the end, Richard stepped aside and let us leave. We brought Meredith safely to Nathan's secured location, where our medical professional conducted a thorough evaluation, officially certifying her mental health and rendering Victoria's police report completely invalid. 2 days later, Victoria realized she had lost control of the situation. Her calls began coming through relentlessly. You are nothing, she hissed through the receiver when I finally answered. You were useless when you left, and you are useless now. I created you, and I can destroy you. Finally, I spoke, offering just one sentence. No, Mother. You destroyed yourself. Porch. I am simply here to manage the aftermath. Before she could respond, I ended the call. Late that evening, I drove to Nathan's residence. I needed to process the impact of Victoria's phone call, the hostility in her voice, the implicit threats, and the unavoidable sense that a final confrontation was approaching. Nathan opened the door, took one look at my face, and asked no questions. Porch. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and sat down beside me on the sofa. For over a year, we had avoided addressing our personal feelings. The effort to challenge Victoria had consumed everything, leaving no space for personal matters. But tonight felt different. The strict composure I had maintained for so long felt almost too heavy to carry alone. "She finally knows," Nathan said softly. "Orch. She knows," I replied. "Now she will use whatever resources she has left against us." "Good. I am tired of waiting as well." Silence settled between us. Then I asked the question I had set aside for months. "Nathan, when all of this is over, if we succeed, what happens between us?" He set his glass down and turned to face me directly. His gaze was deep, intense, and focused. "What happens?" "Orch. I stop pretending I am standing here purely for revenge," he said quietly. "I tell you that at some point along the way, bringing down Victoria became secondary. Building a future alongside you is what I truly want." My heart beat rapidly. For 7 years I had kept everyone at a distance. Orch. After experiencing what Victoria was capable of, placing trust in anyone felt like an overwhelming challenge. Yet Nathan had proven his reliability repeatedly through his actions. He had seen me at my most vulnerable and at my most determined, yet he remained by my side. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "Orch. I don't know how to let someone close without constantly expecting a betrayal." Nathan reached out and took my hand in his. "Then don't worry about that right now. Just let me stand beside you. When we no longer have to fight this battle, we will have plenty of time to figure out everything else." He pulled me closer, and for the first time in 7 years, I stopped resisting. Orch. The kiss that followed was intense and raw, a complete release of every emotion we had kept suppressed for so long. When we finally parted, I recognized that an irreversible change had occurred. I no longer simply wanted to overcome Victoria's influence. I wanted to move past her shadow entirely. I wanted a life of my own once the conflict concluded, and I wanted Nathan to be a part of it. Orch. A month later, we assembled in the main conference room at Harrison and Webb, the top legal firm we had retained, to coordinate our final strategy. Nathan, Meredith, the legal team, and I filled the room. The civil lawsuit, challenging the falsified will, was finalized and ready for court filing. Orch. The criminal referral concerning fraud and altered commercial documents had been submitted to federal prosecutors. Reopened documentation regarding my father's passing had been transferred to cold case investigators. Meredith's audio recordings had been forensically authenticated and approved for court presentation. Meanwhile, a financial crimes unit investigation was tightening its focus daily. Orch. My 25th birthday was just 3 months away. The date when, under the original will, I would legally inherit control of the estate. However, we did not intend to wait until my birthday. We planned to file the lawsuits the following week, forcing Victoria to address multiple legal challenges simultaneously. Orch. Nathan announced that Coal Development Group would publicly initiate merger negotiations with Phoenix Holdings. Once combined, our market presence would surpass that of Sterling Properties. Upon hearing the news, Sterling's board of directors would inevitably panic. Sterling's stock value was already declining, and Victoria's authority rested entirely on an illusion of stability. Orch. Once that illusion shattered, the board would turn against her. At that moment, Meredith spoke up. "There is one more detail. I have been waiting until we were all present to share it." She slid a document across the conference table. It was a handwritten letter addressed to the board of directors at Sterling Properties, signed by Richard. "He sent this to me last week," Meredith explained. "Orch. He wants to testify against Victoria in exchange for immunity from prosecution." I stared at the letter. Richard, the passive figure who had assisted Victoria in undermining so many lives, was now offering to serve as a key witness to protect himself. "Can we trust his account?" Nathan asked. Meredith offered a cold smile. "We don't need to trust him. We simply need to utilize his information. Orch. He knows where all the damaging evidence is kept, some of it quite literal." 2 weeks later, The Connecticut Commercial Real Estate Annual Gala took place in a hotel ballroom. It marked my first public appearance as the owner of Phoenix Holdings, bringing my true identity out into the open. Nathan stood beside me, while Meredith monitored the event via a live stream from a secure location. Tonight featured a highly anticipated announcement. The final bidding list for the $200 million Bridgeport waterfront redevelopment project was set to be disclosed. It was the largest single development opportunity in Connecticut in a decade. A municipal official took the podium and announced the two final contending firms, Sterling Properties and Phoenix Holdings. The entire ballroom erupted into a low hum of confusion. Phoenix Holdings? Who was running Phoenix Holdings? I stepped forward to accept the award. The host announced my full name into the microphone. Elena Margaret Sterling, CEO of Phoenix Holdings. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Camera flashes went off continuously, and hushed conversations broke out in every corner. Across the room, Victoria Sterling stood motionless. Her face was pale with shock and frustration. Our eyes met across the crowded space. For one brief moment, we locked eyes. Then, I offered a quiet nod, accepted the certificate, and walked back to my seat. After the presentation concluded, Victoria approached me in the hallway. Our respective security details stood ready, though neither side intervened. She was trembling with frustration. "You think this is a victory?" she said quietly through gritted teeth. "This is nothing more than a temporary distraction. When the actual bidding begins, I will dismantle your small operation entirely. I will spend 10 times as much, leverage every contact, and dismantle every connection you have built." I looked at her calmly, studying the woman who had cast such a shadow over my life for 7 years. She appeared older than I remembered, and somehow smaller. Her confident composure had completely cracked. "You are free to try," I replied evenly. Then I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice low so only she could hear. "Here is the reality, Mother. I hold the original copy of Grandma's true will. I hold the recording of you making threats against my sister. I hold clear documentation of falsified signatures and evidence regarding my father's passing. Furthermore, Richard is prepared to testify in court and disclose everything." I stepped back, watching the color drain from her face. "This was never just about securing a development project," I said softly. "It is about watching you lose your position in front of everyone who once feared you, and you are out of options." Victoria stood frozen in the hallway, her mask completely shattered. For a moment, beneath the calculated exterior, I saw something rare. Raw, unvarnished fear. She realized the truth. This was no longer a business competition. It was an inevitable collapse, and she was caught right in the middle of it. I turned and walked away without looking back. My phone vibrated with a text from Nathan. The board just convened an emergency meeting. 3 directors called to address a leadership crisis. It has begun. I put my phone away quietly. The public biddings was just one part of the process. Behind the scenes, Victoria's position was collapsing. The board was turning. Richard had cooperated, and federal investigators were closing in. In 3 months, I would turn 25, legally reaching the age to claim what was rightfully mine. The only remaining question was whether Victoria would still be sitting in her executive office when that day arrived, or watching it unfold from inside a federal facility. At 5 in the morning on my 25th birthday, I woke up, unable to sleep due to anticipation. Today marked 2 significant milestones. Under my grandmother's original will, I could legally claim my inheritance, and it was also the day of the final bidding presentations for the $200 million Bridgeport waterfront project. 8 years of planning had led to this moment. 8 years of survival, patience, and watching my mother's position steadily erode while I built my own path in the shadows. Nathan brought me a cup of coffee and gave me an encouraging look. "Happy birthday. Ready to finish this?" I offered a firm smile. "I have been ready for 8 years." We reviewed Phoenix Holdings' final proposal one last time. Torch. As planned, it was thorough, structured, and deeply committed to community reinvestment. The very elements Victoria's proposal lacked. Throughout the week, rumors had circulated constantly. Torch. Desperate to maintain her standing, Victoria called in old favors, attempted to influence council members, pressured subcontractors, and tried to circulate stories questioning Phoenix Holdings' experience and my own stability. She was fighting a losing battle to stay afloat. Torch. At 7 in the morning, a text message arrived from an unknown number with a photograph attached. Victoria entering City Hall through a rear entrance at 6 a.m. Below it was a note. She spent 45 minutes in Councilman Porter's office. Whatever she offered, it was substantial. I forwarded the image to our legal team. Torch. If Victoria was attempting improper influence, we would have clear documentation. If she was simply asking for help, she was bound to make mistakes. Either way, I was prepared. Outside City Hall, reporters gathered in large numbers. The Bridgeport waterfront project had become major news across the state, not just because of the financial stakes, but because of the public-family dispute. Torch. Headlines reading Sterling and mother-daughter real estate battle had been featured for weeks. Victoria had used every interview to portray me as an unstable, vengeful figure, attempting to ruin a mother who had only tried to guide her. I declined to respond to her claims publicly, letting my work speak for itself. Torch. As I walked up the steps, a reporter thrust a microphone forward. Elena, your mother claims you are unstable and that this bid is personal retaliation. How do you respond? I paused and faced the camera calmly. My response is fully detailed in our 200-page proposal, which includes complete financial plans, structural blueprints, and community partnership frameworks. Torch. If that represents retaliation, I would be interested to see her definition of professionalism. Without waiting for follow-up questions, I walked into the building. Behind me, I heard another reporter remark softly, "She is remarkably composed." I allowed myself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction before focusing on the task ahead. Torch. Victoria's attempts to undermine us began before I even entered the venue. My primary contractor called in a panic, reporting that someone was contacting suppliers to spread false claims that Phoenix Holdings was facing insolvency and could not cover payments. 3 suppliers had already threatened to pull out. Torch. My communications director reported that media outlets had received anonymous claims suggesting Phoenix Holdings was involved in improper financial practices. Nathan's office called to report an attempted digital breach, trying to access our sealed bid files using a municipal employee's account credentials. I remained completely steady and documented every incident. Torch. I called the suppliers personally, reassuring them with verified proof of funds from the bank. Our legal team issued cease and desist notices to every outlet circulating unverified claims. We also reported the digital security breach to Agent Webb, adding yet another entry to Victoria's growing file of improper conduct. She was playing dirty, but playing dirty leaves clear footprints. Torch. The council chamber was packed with media, investors, community leaders, and industry professionals. Victoria sat on one side of the room, and I sat on the other. It was the first time we had been in the same room since our hallway encounter. Sterling Properties presented first. Victoria walked up to the podium, her decades of industry experience showing in her composed posture. Torch. Her presentation slides were sleek, featuring prominent architects and promising attractive employment figures and tax revenues. However, a closer look at the details revealed serious flaws that the city council might otherwise overlook. The financial projections were vague, the timeline was entirely unrealistic, and the proposed community benefits were empty promises lacking execution plans. Torch. A council member asked about Sterling Properties' debt-to-equity ratio. Victoria smoothly redirected the question. Our financial footing is entirely solid. Next question, please. Another member brought up the federal inquiry into Sterling's accounting discrepancies. A muscle in Victoria's face twitched imperceptibly. That is merely a baseless claim put forward by disgruntled former employees. People in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone had read the news, and no one was easily fooled. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium with a steady step and a clear, composed voice. My presentation stood in sharp contrast to hers, detailed, transparent, and centered on community impact. I presented formal letters of support from local businesses, offered binding local hiring guarantees backed by financial penalties, outlined vocational training programs with local colleges, and provided fully transparent financial models where every figure could withstand rigorous auditing. Halfway through my presentation, I noticed Victoria whispering anxiously to her attorney. Something was happening. I continued presenting while keeping an eye on them. Suddenly, Victoria stood up abruptly and walked quickly out of the chamber, her attorney following close behind, with a phone pressed tightly to his ear. Something urgent had occurred. I concluded my presentation, answered the counsel's questions thoroughly, and stepped down from the podium. Whatever had caused Victoria such alarm, I would find out soon enough. And I had a strong feeling it was terrible news for her. 2 hours later, both teams waited in the hallway outside the chamber. The doors remained closed while council members held final deliberations. The tension in the air was palpable. I stood with Nathan, Meredith, and my team, while Victoria stood alone on the opposite side. Richard was nowhere to be seen. Her attorney remained on the phone, pacing anxiously near the window. Victoria's composure was completely gone. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and her hands were visibly trembling. Whatever news she had received during my presentation had completely broken her resolve. The doors finally opened, and the city council president walked up to the microphone. After careful deliberation, the Bridgeport City Council has selected the proposal that best serves our community's long-term interests. She paused as the room held its breath. The $200 million waterfront redevelopment contract is awarded to Phoenix Holdings. My team erupted into loud cheers. Nathan gripped my hand tightly, and Meredith let out tears of relief for the first time in years. I looked across the crowd at Victoria. She offered no reaction to the announcement. She simply stood frozen, staring with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was neither anger nor resentment. It was pure, unadulterated fear. Her phone vibrated in her hand. She glanced down at the screen, and what little color remained in her face drained instantly. Her hand shook so violently that the device slipped from her grip, clattering onto the marble floor screen side up. I was standing close enough to see the notification banner clearly. Federal arrest warrant issued. Call back immediately. The walls were finally closing in on Victoria Sterling, and she realized that this time there was no way out. An hour after the vote was announced, I stepped out of our celebration gathering to take an incoming call. It was an unfamiliar number. Richard's distressed, panicked voice came through the line. "Elena, don't hang up, please, I need to talk to you." I almost disconnected immediately, but something in his tone stopped me. He sounded terrified in a way I had never heard before. "Federal agents searched our house this morning," he stammered. "While Victoria was at City Hall, they seized everything: computers, documents, files from the safe." "Good," I replied coldly. "You both brought this on yourselves. You don't understand." "It's far worse than you know," Richard was practically shouting. "Victoria didn't just alter the will. She has been misusing Sterling Properties funds for years. Tens of millions are unaccounted for. The firm is an empty shell. All the liabilities were hidden under dummy subsidiaries." My blood ran cold. How depleted is it? Richard's explanation laid out a complete collapse. Victoria had leveraged Sterling shares as collateral for massive loans. The Bridgeport project was her final attempt to generate cash flow to cover the missing funds. Without that contract, Sterling Properties would face complete insolvency within months. And then came a far more disturbing revelation. She was using company funds to pay off the Harrisons to keep them quiet, he admitted. Arch. The Harrisons? The family Victoria had tried to force me to marry? Quiet about what? I demanded sharply. Richard's voice trembled uncontrollably. About your father. The Harrisons helped her cover up the truth. Their son, the one Victoria tried to force you to marry, he was the one who tampered with the brake lines. Victoria paid them to make it look like an accident. Arch. Standing in the empty hallway, holding the phone tightly to my ear, I felt my entire understanding of my past shatter in an instant. Young Harrison, the unstable individual I had refused to marry at 17, was the person responsible for my father's death when I was 5. Arch. And Victoria, my own mother, had covered it up, and then attempted to hand her own daughter over to him as a quiet arrangement to keep the secret buried forever. This went far beyond business rivalry or simple greed. It was a level of cruelty I had never even imagined. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice as cold as steel. Arch. Because Victoria is facing prison, Richard pleaded desperately, and I am doing everything I can to avoid going down with her. I can testify to all of this in court, but I need your help. I need an immunity agreement. I processed Richard's explosive information in the quiet hallway. Nathan appeared at the doorway, sensing that something serious had occurred. Arch. What about the Harrisons? I asked Richard. Are they still a factor? They are already negotiating with federal prosecutors, he said. Everyone is looking out for themselves now that everything is coming undone. The evidence regarding your father. Old Harrison kept records as leverage. The authorities have all of it now. It's over, Elena. Victoria's entire operation has collapsed. Arch. I told Richard I would have my legal team evaluate his request for an immunity arrangement, but made no promises. If he was lying or setting a trap, I would ensure he faced full accountability alongside Victoria. He said he understood. I hung up and relayed everything to Nathan. The Harrisons' involvement, the missing millions, and the impending institutional collapse. Arch. His expression shifted from shock to a grim, quiet satisfaction. So we didn't just win a development contract, he noted. We won the entire conflict. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. Victoria is still free for the moment. The board hasn't formally removed her, and I have not yet taken control of my inheritance. My phone vibrated with a message from Agent Webb. Arch. Miss Sterling, an arrest warrant has been formally issued for Victoria Sterling. Charges include fraud, document falsification, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. She has 24 hours to surrender. I felt you deserved to know before it hits the news. Conspiracy to commit murder. They had enough verified evidence to move forward. Arch. My mother was about to be taken into custody for her role in my father's death. I waited for the expected surge of triumph or intense satisfaction, but all I felt was a quiet stillness, followed by a deep sense of relief. The heavy burden I had carried for 8 years was finally falling away. That evening, Nathan drove me home. Arch. Media trucks had already gathered outside Sterling Properties headquarters as the story broke across national news outlets. By morning, every major network would be covering the scandal. However, Victoria was not answering calls, and her legal representatives claimed they did not know her location. Federal agents were actively searching, but she seemed to have vanished after leaving City Hall. Arch. As our car turned into Nathan's driveway, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered it. Victoria's voice sounded strangely calm, almost distant. Hello, sweetheart. I suppose you feel you have won now. My heart rate spiked. Where are you? Does it matter? I just want you to know that this isn't over. It will never be over. Arch. You took everything from me, and before they put handcuffs on me, I will make sure you experience what it feels like to lose everything as well. The line went dead. I looked at Nathan, a chill running through my veins. She is planning something, I said. Something dangerous. Arch. We had 24 hours until Victoria's deadline to surrender expired, and a desperate person with nothing left to lose could cause significant harm. Midnight came and went with no word regarding Victoria's whereabouts. I paced nervously in Nathan's living room, checking my phone every few minutes, completely unable to rest. Armed security personnel had been positioned outside the property porch. As a precaution, Meredith had been relocated to a high-security location. Federal law enforcement was actively searching, yet Victoria seemed to have disappeared entirely. 12 full hours had passed since her call promising to make me experience what it feels like to lose everything. Nathan tried to encourage me to rest, but I couldn't. Victoria still had connections, resources, and sheer desperation. She could have fled the country, hidden nearby, or been planning an act of retaliation. Her words kept echoing in my mind. This isn't over, it will never be over. What else could Victoria possibly take from me? Meredith was secure, Nathan was beside me, the firm had won the contract, and my inheritance was protected. Unless, she was planning something completely unexpected, something that went beyond business or money, something deeply personal and irreversible. At 2 a.m, my phone rang. It was Agent Webb. "We located her," he said. "Where?" I asked, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear his response. "At the cemetery. She has been there for hours, sitting by your grandmother's grave." A quiet knot formed in my chest, not out of sympathy, but from a strange, hollow realization. Of course, that was the only place left for her to go, to the woman whose legacy she had tried to dismantle, whose grave she had not visited once in the 8 years following the funeral. "Is she surrendering?" I asked. "She isn't responding to our agents. She requested to speak with you. Only you." I looked over at Nathan, who was already holding his car keys. "Tell her I am on my way." Greenwich Cemetery was one of the oldest in the county, the final resting place for generations of prominent local families. Federal vehicles were parked quietly at the entrance without sirens or flashing lights. Agent Webb escorted me down the dark pathway, past marble monuments and weathered gravestones, toward the Sterling family plot where Margaret Eleanor Sterling rested. There, sitting on the cold grass before my grandmother's headstone, was Victoria. She looked remarkably small and worn down. Her tailored outfit was rumpled, her composure entirely gone, and a half-empty bottle of wine sat beside her. As I approached, she didn't turn around. "Do you know how much your grandmother resented me?" she murmured toward the headstone. "From the very first day I married her son. She was always an acute judge of character." "I am listening," I replied softly. Victoria offered a bitter laugh. "She was the only one who saw right through me. Everyone else, your father, the board, society, they all bought the performance. But Margaret never did. Not once. She finally turned to face me. That is why I had to break her influence before she dismantled mine." Her eyes were red and swollen. In my entire life, I had never seen Victoria cry, not once. "I didn't mean for him to die," she whispered, her gaze drifting back to the headstone. "Your father. It was supposed to be a warning to keep him compliant, but Harrison's son took it too far. And once it happened, what choice did I have? Turn myself in? Go to prison? I had a future to build. I had you and Meredith to raise." "You didn't raise us!" My voice shook with quiet intensity. "You used us. You were even willing to trade me away to a killer, just to keep your secrets buried." Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying me with a strange sense of curiosity. "But look at what it made you. Strong, focused, a true survivor. Would you be the person you are today without me?" I refused to engage in her rationalizations or let her claim credit for my resilience. She was the ordeal I had to survive, nothing more. "I am who I am despite you, not because of you," I said firmly. "Every good quality I have comes from my father and my grandmother. Every scar I carry comes from you." Something in Victoria's demeanor fractured. It was no longer anger, but complete exhaustion and defeat. A quiet sense of regret for a life ruined by her own choices. "What if I tell you where the remaining assets are stored?" she offered weakly. "The offshore accounts, $40 million. We can divide it. You can take all of it if you just let me walk away. I almost laughed at the suggestion. You still think this was ever about money? Then what was it for? Revenge? You achieved it. Torch. I am completely ruined. My reputation, my company, my freedom, all gone. What more do you want? I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. I want you to understand what you actually took. Not money and not a company. You took my father. You took my childhood. You took my ability to trust others. You stole 20 years I should have shared with my grandmother while you isolated and harmed her. Torch. I knelt on one knee in front of my mother, forcing her to look me in the eye. I am not doing this out of simple hatred. You are facing accountability because you committed serious crimes. You altered legal documents, stole from your own enterprise, and tried to have your own daughter institutionalized to protect yourself. Because accountability matters. Torch. Because my father deserved justice, and so did my grandmother. I stood up and brushed the grass off my knees. And every day you serve, you will know that the person who brought about this outcome was the very daughter you treated as disposable. Victoria stared at me for a long time. Then, she gave a slow, subtle nod. You really are Margaret's granddaughter. Torch. And for the first time in 10 years, I looked forward to the future with the exact same anticipation. So now, I leave you with the very question that opened this journey. The thought that lingered in my mind ever since that freezing November night when I was 17. Torch. If the people who once turned you out, who claimed you had no value, who watched you struggle and called it a lesson, if years later they stood before you empty-handed and desperate, would you open that door? Would you invite them back into your life? Would you overlook everything they did? Torch. Or would you leave them standing in the cold, letting them experience the full weight of the isolation they once inflicted on you? I read my father's letter. I visited Victoria one final time. But I did not open that door. Not completely. Some doors are meant to remain closed permanently. Some individuals do not earn a second chance. Torch. And sometimes the most compassionate action you can take for yourself is to simply turn around and walk away, without hatred, carrying only your freedom. My name is Elena Sterling. At 17, I was turned out with nothing to my name. 10 years later, I possess everything that truly matters. Not because I sought revenge, but because I refused to let anyone else's harshness define my life. Torch. If you are going through a similar struggle, if someone is trying to diminish your worth, control you, or set you aside, know this: you can survive. You can rise above it. And you do not need to adopt their methods to succeed. You simply need to outlast the storm, grow stronger, and shine brighter than they ever thought possible. Torch. Eventually, they will be the ones making over 100 missed calls. Calls you will no longer need to answer.